On today's show, it's a book you've seen in comic shops again and again and might not have picked it up. I'll give you the lowdown on Killing and Dying. Welcome to Panelism, the show where we talk about the comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf. I'm Taylor Trask.
I'm Todd A.
I'm so plucky, and I don't know why.
I know why I am. It's because I forgot that I had an iced coffee in my fridge.
Oh.
Until about 5 p.m. And that was a terrible, terrible idea to be like, ooh, 5 o'clock coffee. So, yeah, I'm very, very plucky.
I see. Well, this takes us almost back to the days of coffee and comics where you would just iced coffee was your pick almost every time.
Yeah.
It wasn't tea. It was either gunpowder green or iced coffee.
They're opening Phil's Coffees in multiple locations now. And, it's going to be so hard to stay away from that.
Is Phil's like the California version of In-N-Out Burger for coffee, essentially?
You will know it from the show Silicon Valley. So that's how I think of it. It's yes, it is the California version of that, but it's like the snooty Silicon Valley version, you know.
Where Erlich Bachman goes and just has like all the day old muffins and just sits there in his own misery.
Where, oh my God, why have their names escaped me? But they go in the Pied Piper jacket.
Oh, yeah. Dinesh and Guilfoyle go and
Guilfoyle.
He's like, my name's Jared.
Oh boy.
Have you speaking of things to see? Right before we started recording, I happened to catch the new international Dark Phoenix trailer coming out, and I'm strangely excited by this movie, and I'll tell you why, Todd. I was when X-Men 1 came out in 2000. It was one of my favorite movies of all time because it was this, very earnest, grounded, more or less superhero movie that just say what you will about the leather suits. I really liked the way they put that together. And then X2 came out and totally rocked my world. It built on that world and that storyline and started to thread the Jean Grey Dark Phoenix needle, which at the very tippity end of X-Men 1, there's a quick glimpse where you're like, ooh, something's up with Jean. And then the second movie really fleshes that out. And so when X3 was announced,
they brought it all together in this beautiful finale that was absolutely perfect. And
yeah. I shouldn't even, I could be in trouble for even mentioning that X3 still exists. I'm sort of breaking protocol there, but one of the biggest letdowns of my cinematic viewing life. So the entire time, like when they rebooted it and, they brought in the McAvoy cast and everything, like my hope in X-Men was renewed. And then we've had some, Apocalypse was, but still better than X3. So when they announced Dark Phoenix, I'm like, okay, this is a do-over. Even though the guy directing it had a heavy hand in X3, it's not Brett Ratner. So that's all that matters. And, we've had some kind of mixed reactions on trailers and promotional stuff. And it's like, okay, but this international trailer really, man, it sells a movie that I want to see really badly. And I hope if this is going to be the last X-Men movie for a while, if not for good, which it very well may be, it looks like they're going to try to do this. I mean, it's not going to be loyal to the comic story. That was never going to happen, but what they're going to give us is a return to form, hopefully, to those first two movies.
Well, now, so I had not been aware that this was out until you mentioned it before we started recording. What is the significance of this being the international trailer? Is there a domestic one that you've also seen, which is not as cool, or is there no domestic one?
Domestic one, there was one that they released, I think last week or the week before, fairly recently. That was the US version. I don't know why the hell they have US and international versions. No one gives a shit. It doesn't matter. No one looks at it like in those through that lens. But the international one, quote unquote, it's different, newer footage, and it really, instead of just kind of chaos and Jean Grey's evil and oh no, like this is much more. This walks you through the story beats. Like they go to space to do this, then it's just a lot more deliberate, and you really get a sense of the movie. And you're not like kind of going and rolling the dice going, am I going to like this? Like, it's kind of like a trailer used to be, where it's like, hey, here are the beats. Doesn't have the guy narrating it, like in a world where, that's not there. But strangely enough, this came out, and then the newest Shazam trailer hit, I think yesterday or the day before or over the weekend.
Oh,
that looks killer
too. Either.
I was already in the bag for that movie anyway, but this gives us more Mark Strong as Savannah. And I think Shazam is going to be the hidden gem of the superhero movie verse this year. I think, Aquaman was great, but that was more of a Christmas, Thanksgiving Christmas movie. I think Shazam is going to be the sleeper hit. I'm just going to put it out there.
Well, I'll just mention this because I'm not going to get a better segue, but I had a very involved conversation with my father before we started recording, trying to explain to him why Captain Marvel was a woman, because he remembers Captain Marvel as Shazam.
Oh no.
Because that's what Shazam was called for 70 years or whatever. And so he thought that all this like hype about the Captain Marvel movie and he thought there was some controversy surrounding it because it was a woman. And I had to explain the copyright and trademark nuances of this to my father, the attorney. But I'll note that when we shouldn't poo-poo international versions, because remember in Iron Man 3 when he travels to China to get an operation.
Oh my word. Yeah, that's right.
But if you don't remember that, it's because it only happened in the Chinese cut of Iron Man 3. And I can't remember how we found that out, but that fucking blew my mind. It was like on a podcast. Somebody like emailed in or something and told us about that. Or you told me, and it just
then we watched it. I remember watching going, this is all I mean the Chinese for trying to get into movies. It's like it's not necessary. It is so shoehorned in that it's an insult to the Chinese audience. It's like, look, China, we will include you, but only in this really specific way that has no bearing on the plot whatsoever. Here you go.
Oh boy.
Just kind of like I was watching Pacific Rim Uprising over the weekend, which I mean, if it's not Del Toro, don't even buy it. They tried, they really did try, but it's a shadow of the first movie, which I really liked, by the way. As bonkers as it was really good looking bonkers. This one, it's like they tried so hard to be like, look, and all the same people are coming back, and we're gonna make it, you really tie the connective tissue together. But just it was such a weak sauce story. But the reason I bring it up, there was a Chinese character. Clearly, there was Chinese co-production because there was a major Chinese character who spoke in Mandarin most of the time, and even like bitched at one of the characters that his Mandarin was not good enough. And I was like, oh, see, this is how you do. Like, she's crucial to the plot. This makes more sense if you're going to do a Chinese co-production. Make it intentional from the beginning, right? Don't make them the doctors that save Tony Stark's life at the end, but not really, because he's fine. And everybody's fine. It was so weird. It was such a hamster. Anyway.
However, speaking of connective tissue,
there's no segue out of that. I'm sorry.
The doctor. No, there is. In Iron Man 3, in the Chinese operating scene, maybe not the doctor, but one of the actors in that was Fan Bingbing, who plays Blink in X-Men Days of Future Past.
Who's also missing still, if I'm not mistaken.
I think she came back, but she is also the white-haired witch, which, as you know, is one of my favorite Magic Ninja movies and is available to watch in its entirety for free on YouTube.
I didn't realize she was in that.
She is the star of the
She's the star. Oh, you had mentioned that. We did a podcast episode. I don't know which number it is, where you talked about those movies. Yeah. And I remember you mentioned that. Okay. All right.
Boy, we really went off the rails with that. I don't know where you were going. Shazam, Captain Marvel.
Shazam, Captain Marvel. And now comics. I'm going to do a book review this week. And I'll give you a little preface. I had plans to review another book. I won't say its name. A small sort of kind of comic trade hybrid, not long enough to be a trade, but too long to be a comic. Didn't quite, maybe I'll talk about it on a future episode, but it didn't quite work. We're talking about the comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf, and it didn't quite measure up. So I was in a weird pinch. And yesterday I had a killer deal on Amazon for a book. I kind of have my pull list on Amazon for at any given time. So, if I walk into a comic shop, I can go through it, get the stuff I need, or if Amazon's got a really killer deal on something, I'll grab it there. And in this particular case, one of those books was on a killer deal, and it came, and I cranked through it last night, and wanted to talk about it today. And that is a book that I know you'll have seen, Todd, in various comic shops and bookstores, and even like in the Barnes & Noble comics section. Most of our listeners will have seen it. It's a book that you can't, once you see it, you're like, I got to get that book someday. And I finally did, and I'm glad I did. It's called Killing and Dying by Adrian Tomine. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's published by Drawn and Quarterly. And the reason you're going to know it, once you see the cover, it'll become instantly clear. The cover is a mostly brown tan book with a very sort of very geometric, very sort of layered art on the front, but then it's covered in a plastic book jacket that has the words Killing and Dying on the book jacket, so that it creates this kind of 3D shadow layer effect as it sits on the cover. So if you take the book jacket off, you actually lose a crucial part of the cover art, which is kind of cool, because I tend to not like book jackets.
Exactly.
They don't serve a function. I almost, unless they're super duper cool, I tend to remove them and just keep the book as it is. This is a book that you will definitely want to keep all parts of it. And it's this wonderful little. It's in true Drawn and Quarterly fashion, it is it's almost a work of art onto itself. Before you even open it, it's cool to look at, cool to have on your shelf. But once stop real quick and Google Killing and Dying graphic novel, and you're going to see the cover and you're going to know exactly the book I'm talking about. You're going to be like, oh, that book, I see it all the time. We're going to talk about it. We're going to get into it. Adrian Tomine has, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't think it's Tomine, but
actually, that's how I've heard it, but Tomine? I don't know. Yeah.
Really? Well, we'll say Tomine then. Fine. Adrian Tomine.
It's probably something. It's the third option we don't even know about.
Yeah, probably. He's a very accomplished author. He, in this particular case, he did the story and the art. He's done some other stuff: Sleepwalk and Other Stories, Summer Blonde, Shortcomings, New York Drawings. Very, very impressive bench of work. This is kind of one of his marquee releases. It's divided into 6 smaller stories, and I'll go through each of those in just a minute. And he did it all start to finish, all the arts, all the the stories, everything. This is truly one of those like creator titles that just from start to finish you get a full sense of this guy's brain and what he was the things he was trying to put out there, concepts he was trying to break down, and all that good stuff. Where should I begin? I'm trying to think of what we'll talk about the 6 stories. So I'm not going to go through them all in depth, but I'll give you the titles and I'll break them down a little bit. The 6 stories, and it's not an anthology. They don't relate necessarily. There's some thematic stuff that works across all the stories, but it's more like it's a lot like that Black Mirror episode where the girl goes to the roadside thing and she kind of hears it's that Black Mirror episode that breaks down all the different
oh my gosh, I don't think I've seen this one.
Oh my heavens. Well, anyway, there's a Black Mirror episode that does this, but it's got these 6 stories. Definitely they're very self-contained and wonderful, and there's some thematic tissue, but more or less they stand on their own. They're titled as follows: A Brief History of the Art Form Known as Hortisculpture. That's one of them. Another one's called Amber Sweet, then Go Owls, translated from the Japanese, Killing and Dying. It's itself is a story in here, and then one called Intruders. Across the board, the art is very much in the same vein. Very simplistic, very clean lines, a lot of empty space in the panels, very deliberate use of color. And the whole thing is very grid based, with the exception of probably the only one that doesn't quite fit a very tight grid is translated from the Japanese, which I'll talk more specifically about in a minute. But everything it uses either a 9 grid very loyally or just a very rigid grid pattern. Some of the stories, maybe the grid, the actual story called Killing and Dying uses probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 12, 16, like a 20 grid page. So very compact art in each of these. So the attention on character and where a character's attention is, point of view or focal view is going. All that's very well considered. It almost looks like somebody read Scott Understanding Comics, the book. Oh my god, I want to say Scotty Young. That's not right.
No, that is correct, right? Scott McCloud.
Scott McCloud. Jesus, I'm so sorry. Sorry, Scott.
Sorry, different Scotty we like. Scotty Young's books are also
there's too many names that are similar. It's almost like somebody read Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud and really put it all into practice, like, and not in an amateurish way or a grade school way. Like this is definitely like the creator at the peak of his powers, right? But it's a lot of the principles in Understanding Comics, use of space and setting and character, how you understand a character and how you draw a character and points of view and all that stuff. It's all very much on display here. It's like it's purposely. It's almost like he's like Adrian Tomine is really flexing his muscles and showing you the fundamentals in a way that it's really pleasing to see. I will say this is a book that if you are just looking to kind of like, if you want something fluffy and fun and poppy, this is not a book for you. This is the very definition of a literary graphic novel. It's, it's got some higher, it requires some patience. It's, it rewards you for that patience pretty quickly, but you can't just flip through it and be like, oh, that was fun. You can read each story, on their own. Maybe if you want to read a story a night before you fall to bed, that's fine. But definitely you want to be paying attention. You want to be able to take it in and think about it. And it's very much a graphic novel in that sense. So go ahead.
Were you familiar with anything else that Adrian had done prior to this?
Only via covers. If you walk into some really good comic stores, Floating World in Portland's a great example. You're going to see a lot of drawn and quarterly books, and his name's on quite a few. And so I've been familiar with him from that angle, and I've been wanting Killing and Dying for a while. It's one of, not to sound like a broken record, but it's one of those books. Every time you walk into a store, it's there, and you're like, one of these days I got to get this thing because it looks cool.
Oh yeah, this is one of those I think of at the Drawn and Quarterly booth at Comic Cons where I've picked it up so many times. I'm like, oh boy,
yeah,
I'm not ready for this yet.
Yeah. And by the way, definitely buy, if you're going to get it, definitely buy it physically. And definitely buy the hardcover version. There's a paperback version that looks fine, but it does not have this killer cover wrapping and everything. And just the physical artifact of this thing is definitely something you want hardcover. And this would not be the same experience reading digitally. You have to engage with it physically to really sort of appreciate the material fully. Also, the pages are really thick and just beautiful to look at, and this is just something you want to appreciate the art in its entirety in physical form.
Yeah.
So let's break down these 6 stories. I'm not going to go into too much depth because there's a lot of surprises along the way. It's a good intellectual exercise to go through these yourself. But the first one, Hortisculpture, this was a little tricky. It's the very first story, and for me, it was a little hard to get into. That's why I gave that preface just a moment ago. First couple pages, you're like, what is going on here? And Horticulture is kind of like the graphic novel Wilson. It's a series of 4-panel little vignettes that are all linear. It's all the same story, but it kind of jump cuts in these little 4-panel chunks. The art doesn't change like Wilson does, which is for this is appreciated because it would be way too confusing. But you get these little 4-panel chunks, and you kind of where he's going with the story isn't quite apparent at first. So I bring this up because I almost didn't want to start reading this last night because I'm like, oh man, this looks hard to get into. It's not. It's wonderful. So just put up, really be patient with it for the first couple pages, and then you'll be fine. What you find out is it's a story about a guy named Harold and his wife, who is actually a mixed race couple, which is kind of cool. And it's kind of a meditation of what art is and how to mix an artistic pursuit with a day job, and then how that struggle impacts a marriage. So it's very much this character study on these two people. The guy Harold is trying to create this new art form called hortisculpture, where he takes cement and he's I think he's like what do you call the people who work on lawns and clean up lawns and all that stuff?
A gardener.
Kind of, but not, but even a rung down from that. It's very much like a blue collar kind of thing. And so he creates this, he's going to revolutionize the art world with this thing called hortisculpture. Nobody wants it. Everybody's making fun of him. It's straining his marriage. He's so obsessed with trying to make this work that he's neglecting his day job. So it's very much a classic story of a guy who wants to do art but doesn't know if he's good enough for it. And meanwhile, it's sabotage. His obsession with it is sabotaging everything else around him. There's a use of it. One more thing I did note in my notes. It's kind of like if you're a King of the Hill fan, and what if Bobby Hill grew up? He'd kind of be this guy. They even draw him very like almost the physical drawing of him kind of looks like Bobby Hill. And you're like, man, this is kind of the way he talks, sort of his voice, very, very similar to a grown up Bobby Hill. It's very interesting. The use of color in this is interesting too. The first couple panels and pages, it's black and white. And then all of a sudden a full page comes in that's all color. And at first I wondered, is he doing this? Are the colored pages only on those scenes where he's got, it seems they kind of kick in when he's got a hopeful moment where it's like, oh, that's not necessarily true. Cause there's another page of color stuff where it's not hopeful, but like, there's a dream sequence where he's imagining what it would be like if this all worked out for him. And that's in color. There's another scene where he hears his daughter trying to stick up for him. That's in color. So it's interesting when it does come back into color. I don't know if it was intentional, if it just sort of luck of the draw worked out that the first, cause it seems like it's like the first page of a new section starts off in color and then it goes back to black and white. But very just all around a really good little story. Second one is called Amber Sweet.
Can I ask you a question there?
Yeah.
Just not to jump ahead, but does that color, the use of color, like go through every story here in that way, or like is that a motif or a theme that is repeated from story to story, or does every story have its own unique coloring?
Great question. No, each story is very much self-contained.
Oh, okay, cool.
They're drawn somewhat similar because Adrian has a very sort of minimalist way of drawing and his use of panels. So like they'll visually look similar. He does deliberately draw some characters different from story to story. So you get a sense of how, given his sort of palette, how he differentiates things. But no, every story you could almost sell each one of these as a little mini graphic novel and be perfectly happy. They happen to be collected in this book. And there is, like I said, there's thematic tissue that does connect them all. There's not characters or storylines that repeat, but there is sort of a sense of these character studies of these people, these vignettes that he's either experienced firsthand or he knows people who've been these people, and he collects them here. It's kind of a nice meditation on what it is to be a person, in 2019. Even though this was created a couple of years ago, there's a lot of modern day parallels that I think are really good to consider. So another one is called Amber Sweet. It's about a female college student who gets confused for an online porn star. So everywhere she goes, people are like snickering, and she finally figures out what it is. It's this other girl who's this porn star online who looks a lot like her. That messes with a lot of her relationships over time and her ability to get things done and all this stuff. Really good, interesting story. And then there's a really fun little twist at the end that I really, really liked, both in terms of how the story is being told, but also what happens to her. So that's really fun. Third story is called Go Owls. It's about a man and a woman who meet at an AA meeting and start a codependent relationship, a very unhealthy codependent relationship. The man is a pot dealer, and she's kind of just sort of this sort of soul. She's not quite sure what, this lost soul, not sure what she's doing with her life. Reminds me a lot of the Jesse and Jane relationship in Breaking Bad. If you've ever seen that, very, very similar. In fact, I would even wonder if one wasn't inspired by the other. I don't know which one came first, probably Breaking Bad, but this has interesting parallels to that. The title comes from the fact that they're both Owls fans. There's a sports team called the Owls, and she's wearing an Owls t-shirt when he meets her at the AA meeting. So that's where that comes from. And again, there's a great twist ending that is sort of sad, but also like, oh, that's, knowing that he's taking these stories to a place you don't necessarily expect is really fun to see.
Now, I think I can guess the answer to this question, but do you get the sense that these are stories drawn from real life that he's kind of adapted, or are they just, pure fiction, or, do Do you get any feeling on that?
Man, that's a good question. My take is that there has to be a hint of reality in each of these. Otherwise, I don't know. There's so much nuance, and it's such a relaxed storytelling that I'm like, he has to know somebody
right
in these positions, because it's too easy to make them too fantastical or too dramatic if there wasn't a real world connection of some kind. This is a great segue, because the next story is called Translated from the Japanese. And this has to be real. It's written from the point of view of a mother who's taking her son to America to reunite with their father, who'd been over here teaching. And it's all told through these beautiful single panel, like full page single panels, very geometric in the art, and almost exclusively environment shots. You know, if there's no people represented. If you see people, you see like the backs of their heads, like at the baggage claim at the airport or something. But it's not like you see like the main character sitting there in the airplane, or you see maybe the empty airplane seat, or you see the baggage carousel, spinning. So it's very much this kind of like this journal, or these letters that she's writing to her son, that he's reading, and then it's like the memory of the places that accompanied the journey. Very interesting too. I think Adrian Tomine might be this. I should have done my research. He might be Japanese.
I did some.
Might be Japanese.
Well, he is, but he was born in America to American parents who were both professors.
Okay, so then there's definitely some or all reality in this particular story called Translated from the Japanese. So that's got to be real. The one after that, the namesake of the book, Killing and Dying, is about a female stand-up comic and her dad. And again, very much
the name of that in reference to comedy plus an elderly parent is like, I can already see the twists.
Yeah, well, and it's like, and it very much is about her, kind of focused on her stand-up, when she succeeds and when she fails, and how her dad fits into that. Which you read it, and you're like, this has to be a real person. Like if he just invented this whole cloth, well on him, because there's so much. It just feels so relatable. It feels like a story you heard about a friend, or that this is my cousin. It's so relatable in that way, and that's the one that's got the very small panels. So a lot of it is just blank environment, or very, very minimalist environment. Like the father's in a kitchen, so the father's full color, but the kitchen may be black and white line drawings behind him, or they're in a windowsill, so you see like the window frame, but a blank wall behind them while they're hugging or something. In that respect, it reminds me a lot of the art from the book Here, which, if you've never seen, is also one of those books that you find in Barnes & Noble a lot. That's a book I've talked about on past episodes, where it's the same physical space over the course of like 3,000 years.
Yeah, that's that.
And you can flip forward and backwards and see, the house that the space it takes on, or before the house was built, or long after the house is gone. That, if you liked that art, this is very similar. This is a bit more refined, because that was very simplistic, but it feels like it's part of the same family of art. In fact, I would even wonder, I should go back and see if Adrian Tomine has anything to do with that book, because that would be, that just occurred to me now that was a very similar thing. And then the final story is just called Intruders. Much more poetic, not necessarily like a story so much as just kind of a person's narrating as they're observing things and things are happening. So kind of graphic comics as poetry in that respect. So a really good, diverse packet of 6 stories. Like I said, there are themes that, as you reread it, I'm sure I'll find new connecting points and parallels and mirroring going on. But you can enjoy each story individually. And it just has this wonderful kind of feeling of like, this is what was in this guy's head at this particular time. And here it all is. And it's very much, when we go back to have that conversation of comics as when you buy books, you kind of feel like an art collector sometimes. This definitely fits in that bracket of, this is graphic novels as kind of as literature, as a higher form of the medium, which is always not, I definitely love the Rock and Sock'em Robot versions of comics, that just here it is. Obviously I've had some books and some things that do that, but I also really like the thinking man's books like this, that just make you feel like that the medium is striving for more. Drawn and quarterly, obviously, that's a lot of what they do, especially when they package stuff this well. But I highly recommend it. Get it physically, get it hardcover, and pop it on your shelf.
Yeah, this was one. And the reason I asked about the true stories was because I just sort of had it mixed up in my head. Like I knew Adrian Tomine had done an autobiographical work. But as I look on the Drawn and Quarterly site, I'm assuming that I mixed this up with a previous book of his called Scenes from an Impending Marriage.
Oh, okay.
But I've been passingly familiar with him for a long time because my brother went to art school, and I would absorb any little tidbits of culture that my brother passed along, and he had copies of Adrian Tomine's Optic Nerve, like self-published comics way back when. So when he started popping up in I know it's not exactly mainstream, but like big, once he got the, Drawn and Quarterly books and stuff, and I started seeing his name, it was like, I made that connection of like, oh, wow, this is, I remember seeing his self-published comics a long time ago. And he's just grown to like huge stature. So I'm so excited that you chose this book to talk about. And I have a recommended, if you like, which is maybe only to the audience of one, you, but several years ago, Drawn and Quarterly put out these books by a Japanese manga artist named Yoshihiro Tatsumi, and they were collections of like his short stories illustrated in a 1960s kind of manga style. When you started talking about Adrian, I made that connection. I was like, wait, and so like literally as you were talking at the beginning of this podcast, I'm putting it all together and Googling this. Adrian edited and did the lettering and like design for those Drawn and Quarterly books. So I would say if you like this version of like those short, personal stories where you feel like he had to have drawn this from real life. The only one of Tatsumi's books that I've read is Abandon the Old in Tokyo. And I just loved it. There's another volume of his stories out, but yeah, Adrian Tomine is connected to those. So
there's another book that I've seen that I'm now realizing is him too, called New York Drawings. That if you Google it, I've seen it in higher end comic stores, but I also saw it in the LaGuardia Airport in one of their kind of gift shops. I remember going, this looks cool, and I actually added it to another of my wish list, not realizing that it was actually a true graphic novel by this guy. So
is it a graphic novel, or are these actual New Yorker cartoons? Like the cover looks just like that.
I don't know. I forget what it is. I'll have to go flip through it. Yeah. So he's done a lot of stuff. The other thing you mentioned was there's a collection. You'll see it in a lot of comic stores too. 33 stories, the complete Optic Nerve mini comics.
Oh yeah.
You'd mentioned that. That's another book that if you become an Adrian Tomine fan, again, just like an art collector, you're gonna want to have the full body of work of this guy, probably.
Oh yeah, what a great pick to feed into those conversations we've had recently about like the art gallery on your shelf. Like this is I mean, it's seriously like as you're talking about it, and I'm staring at the Drawn and Quarterly website, I'm like recalling like how great his stuff looks, and it's like, oh yeah, that would look good on the shelf. I'd love to flip through that. And
well, I'll confess one final thing. When this arrived, and I was doing my research for the episode, I was like, who published this? I did not realize this was
wow.
Only because I kind of don't want to default to them every time a cool looking book pops up. Like, other publishers do good work too. Archaea, obviously is one of them. Like, so it's
reverse confirming your own bias.
Yeah. I'm like, sure. And then I was like, oh god damn it, Drawn and Quarterly again. So it is one of those books. Like at some point, I'm either just going to have an exclusive shelf of Drawn and Quarterly stuff, or that's just going to subsume my existing comic shelf.
Oh my gosh,
the way they package their books, amazing. The sort of the unique angle of creators they publish, it really is like the really kick-ass. If Image is like, that really good indie music label that's like, you're gonna see artists that are just gonna blow your mind. Drawn and Quarterly's like, hey, we're gonna do this like 80-gram vinyl with like full color, like booklet and like an exclusive, like you're gonna open it up and all this stuff's gonna fall out of it, and it's just gonna be this like never-ending piece of music that's just gonna be important and blah. That's Drawn and Quarterly for comics. Like I gotcha. I can't think my music knowledge is I can't name an actual labels. I just had to
Images Merge Records, and Drawn and Quarterly is like when Vinyl Me Please does a re-release.
There you go. There you go.
The 80 gram vinyl.
Yeah.
I mean, you might as well just default when you get that beautiful book to thinking it's Drawn and Quarterly, because one of the other wonderful things is that I think you can take Adrian Tomine's work and put it right next to like Guy Delisle and is Hark a Vagrant on Drawn and Quarterly?
Yes.
Yeah, just any of those like cool looking hardbound books and go, it fits perfectly. I
just forgot
Kate,
the name.
That's exactly. I was like racking my brain. I know it's Kate. Cool.
And strangely enough, that's where it's going to go on my shelf. I have on my, by no strategy, just all my Drawn and Quarterly stuff kind of, there's a center of gravity to it. So it's all together. I'm like, that, and then, oh God, hang on. I'm gonna actually walk to my shelf because there's one I want to read off to you. Hang on here. It's Blankets by Craig Thompson. Obviously, we talked about that. Kate Beaton.
Oh yeah.
But then also Linda Berry's What It Is, which I'll probably review on another episode. That's another Drawn and Quarterly book. It's just it never ends, and you're like, how much? I mean, Wilson, Daniel Close, Drawn and Quarterly. It's just they have this penchant for amazing stories and amazing packaging. It's interesting to me that they have not. Maybe they have, and I just don't know about it. But I don't know. They should do their own just Drawn and Quarterly store. I mean, at this juncture, like imagine a physical space designed to showcase their stuff and only their stuff. I mean, that I may have to become a new level of comics fan if that ever comes to pass.
Oh, it's a embarrassment of riches from Drawn and Quarterly. I mean,
heavens.
And like we've said before, we highly recommend subscribing to their mailing list, because when they do those discount sales, it's like, otherwise, I mean, I can't even buy too much from them when they do that, because it's like, it's going to take me so long to get through I still have not read Jerusalem, which I've had sitting on my shelf for like a year, because it's going to be such an undertaking, it's, oh my gosh, they're wonderful. I would say, where can people find us? But I wanted to say one more thing before we wrap up, which is you had brought up that on our Instagram, which is one of the best places to find us, which is panelism.inc, that some people have mentioned that they are going back through our shows, listening to the back catalog, and starting with episode number 1. I might advise starting with episode 100 and getting us to kind of tour through what we thought were some highlights, because we mention episode numbers and we do like short synopses. And I don't know. What do you think about that? I actually think our first 3 episodes are pretty good too. I
mean, they're not bad. It's us trying to figure it out in real time.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of fun to listen to. And it's interesting. Every week I go back and look at our listener numbers and which episodes are getting listens that particular week, and it always surprises me. Like, episode 100 is always in there because it is a great place to start. It's, we're pretty breathless through it, but we pack a lot into that episode. So definitely check that one out. But there's episodes that pop up that I'm like, really? Like I think our Avengers Infinity War review from last year is usually up there. A lot of early Game of Thrones talk before we spun that off as its own show called Wednesday in Westeros. So, which, by the way, is coming back pretty soon. We're going to be talking about Game of Thrones very, 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 very soon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would definitely start with episode 100. And at any time, if you go back and there's an episode you like, or there's a book you want us to review, please let us know on Instagram or email us. We're info@panelism.inc. And you can find us online. Instagram's our best place. That is just panelism.inc, as Todd said. And that's also our domain, www.panelism.inc. That's .ink. And you can find this show and all our shows wherever podcasts are found, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, and all the rest. Search us and share it with your friends.
Excellent. Thank you, Taylor. I guess that does it for us. So I will see you on the next episode.
What's your tagline? You got to say your tagline.
I'll talk to you on the next episode.
No,
you didn't lead me into it this time, which is I'll see you then, or I'll see you later.
That's it right there.